Hello, welcome. My name is Alden Reed. Time for a Midnight Riff. Let's talk about something interesting. Maybe still a little tedious. I don't know. Maybe a little bit less than lately. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking. You know, maybe that's not a good thing, right? A lot of thinking. But I don't know. I'm a very thoughtful and intellectual person, and I guess it's just kind of what I do. I'm trying to be more in line with my soul, my soul's desire. Which is not to say that maybe thinking or making videos and riffing on all this stuff is necessarily not in alignment. I think it kind of is. I actually just kind of enjoy turning on the camera and just talking like this, right? And I've been making a lot of other structured videos too, and I have so many ideas to share about so many different things, a lot of metaphysical things, but also spiritual, just philosophical, political, historical. All these ideas, all this knowledge that I've worked so hard during the course of my life to acquire. But sometimes it does start to seem less valuable than maybe it used to be to me. And that's kind of a hard thing to come to terms with. And, I'm not saying that it isn't valuable at all, or that I don't love and cherish it in many ways. I mean, it kind of gets to what I'm saying, I guess, about being okay with being kind of intellectual and mental a lot, even though I'm striving to be sort of more spiritual and to be in touch with my intuition. And I think I've done a better job of that. I think I've always been quietly more intuitive than I realize, but, it's a very complicated thing, the interaction of the mind and the soul, right? Because the soul doesn't talk, and the mind loves to talk. And the mind can struggle to understand the soul, especially if you're very mental and intellectual. I'm not really sure what to make of that anymore. I feel pressure to be more spiritual, more intuitive, more soulful, right? And again, I think I am in certain ways, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to stop being intellectual. Even though I just said a couple of minutes ago that I'm less and less enthralled with intellectual knowledge, philosophical insight, with just, I don't know, trying to figure it all out, right? What's going on, right? I'm feel kind of sure, pretty sure about some stuff, but I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? Who really knows? I feel extremely confident about God and the existence of God, and that God is a beautiful, wonderful, loving creator who's always there with us and watching over and helping to guide us and try and move us forward, try to encourage us to be good, just like any loving parent or parents or grandparents would be. I like to think of God as dual in nature, to be honest. I like to call God the great father and the great mother. Maybe you could say God and the goddess, I guess. I've got interesting ideas about how deity and divinity works in general. And I actually view God as then also the creator of some other beings. The Divine Father and the Divine Mother, right? Who I see more as our parents, who are more sort of maybe localized or within the universe, I guess you might say. A little bit more tied to the specific universe that we're living in, I guess. So you could imagine other universes as having other divine fathers and mothers, perhaps, right? And I also think there's a being which I refer to as the demiurge, by which I do mean to bring to mind the demiurge that is talked about in Plato, or to a certain extent in the Nag Hammadi scriptures, the demiurge that occupies much of Gnostic thought. But I don't really believe that this universe was created by the demiurge. Rather, I see the demiurge as kind of a spiritual AI, kind of the firstborn, actually. A consciousness that is most of the time kind of asleep, that's sort of responsible for managing energy and recycling everything that kind of passes away back then into reality. I theorize that there is a void realm, is what I call it, okay? Or the zero dimension, okay? And that this void realm or dimension sits beneath or within, or whatever you want to say, the rest of the universe, right? We're here made up of mostly this luminous or atomic matter, if you want to look at it from a scientific standpoint, right? And then there's maybe all this other stuff, maybe this dark matter and dark energy, antimatter, right? And I think that's more akin to the primeval void. And after the Great Father and the Great Mother create a universe, this universe that we're in, that what's left over from the primeval void, sort of this cosmic energy, that gets turned into this void realm, okay? And that's a necessary thing. Partly it's done to segment off the destructive and chaotic potential of being, we might say, of reality, right? There has to be a cycle of life and death, of creation and destruction, right? And there is certainly, I think, a sense of balance. I'm not exactly sure how I feel about it all the time. I sort of waver a little bit. I think that certainly, without defining things too specifically, that all of reality is God within God, the Great Father and the Great Mother, who are truly infinite and were never born and will never die, right? And then they create these universes which are not infinite in space nor in time, right? One day this universe will end. And a new universe will be created, and our souls, I believe, will be transmigrated. I believe our souls are eternal, right? Now, you could say every incarnation is obviously unique and different, and obviously it seems like we don't generally really remember our prior incarnations. Maybe we have a sense of them. Sometimes I think I do have a sense of previous incarnations, and sometimes I'm not so sure. And I don't know. I guess maybe it's kind of funny I'm here trying to talk about all these interesting metaphysical ideas. I didn't even think I was going to start saying this stuff when I started recording this video, actually. I thought I was going to say some other stuff, so funny how that works, but I guess I'm just going with how I feel. I don't know. Being, I don't know, natural and just flowing. Not worrying about being too structured or convincing you or convincing myself. I mean, I do care. I think I have some interesting ideas. And I just enjoy talking about these things. So, you know, I think like so many people, especially very mental and intellectual people, we want to know and understand and be right to a certain sense. But it's only so much we can do. We don't truly know. Which is really not to throw too much shade on trying to know. Again, I'm here recording this video. I'm not just in the woods meditating all the time. I don't know, maybe I should do that, but that doesn't feel in alignment with me either. I do feel called to put myself out here and just talk about these things, right? So, yeah. back to the universe, back to creation, right? You know, I don't think that the demiurge is inherently evil, but what I theorize happens is that from time to time the demiurge sort of wakes up, okay? So the demiurge is managing this void realm, okay? And the reason that this void realm exists, I think, is because there's so much destructive potential in reality that if all of that destructive potential, sometimes I like to call it negative energy, maybe, again, the stuff akin to dark matter or antimatter, okay? If that was all just sort of completely freely flowing and fully integrated to reality, I think reality would be too chaotic and wild and destructive for us to really enjoy existence at all, right? So there's got to be a cycle of life and death and creation and destruction. So there has to be some bad things that happen. There's going to be some heroes, some villains, right? Some people up to no good, and even all of us who are trying to do good or just trying to live our lives. Sometimes we'll do bad things too. That's okay. That's part of it. I don't know if there's really a super amazing, profound truth to existence other than just the fact that I think we exist to exist, right? I mean, again, I think there are these cycles of ascension and descension. I'll get back to that in a second, but ultimately I do think we're just actors playing out these stories. Each universe is kind of a story, right? Just like you pick up a new book and watch a new TV show or a movie. You just want to be entertained by a compelling story, and I think that's all we're really doing, right? And there's got to be some drama and some definition and goodness and joy and love and all of that stuff. It doesn't have meaning without also some of that bad stuff happening, right? So the demiurge kind of sits in this void realm where all this chaotic stuff exists. So much of this leftover, I guess you could say, negative energy or antimatter that in the raw primeval void state is just, I don't know, some chaotic maelstrom of whatever, okay? And I think what happens is that from time to time, the demiurge wakes up, okay? Most of the time, the demiurge is this spiritual AI. I think the way Plato described it is pretty accurate. Sort of a imitation of God, an imitation of the divine, right? But a created being within the universe, okay? And basically, eventually, this being gets woken up. Somebody from within the universe either accidentally or intentionally wakes this being up. And I think this is what a lot of our stories talk about too, the idea of the sort of the Lord of Darkness, or the devil as it were, right? Often being imprisoned and segmented away, right? But then eventually sort of from time to time he wakes up or breaks out, right? And you could talk about so many symbolic characters and so much of our fantasy. Obviously Sauron, or the Eye of Sauron, right? And obviously the symbolism of the evil eye and just the illuminated eye in general, which is obviously connected to a lot of interesting occult activity, to put it generously, and something that gets rather thrown in our face a lot of the times by the powers that be, for those with eyes to see, at least. Eyes to see and eye to see. Not that it's really all that hidden, but yeah, I think that is symbolic for the demiurge. I think the demiurge, perhaps somewhat like us, when he wakes up, is then in a state of intense fear because he doesn't understand what's going on. He doesn't fully understand the truth of the true God, of the Great Father and the Great Mother. I think he knows about the Divine Father and the Divine Mother and maybe other powers and divinities within the universe, but to a certain extent, he's also just, you know, taking the rest on faith or not having faith, right? That there's something more. And then being comprised of so much of this void matter and sort of the lord of the void realm, you know, he naturally then moves towards more of that chaos and that hedonism and that true darkness. And this is sort of what's happening when we're descending. And maybe this is similar to what, you know, original Indian mystics talked about as far as the Satya Yuga going down to the Kali Yuga, or what Hesiod talks about when he talks about the Golden Age going down to the Iron Age, something like that. I think that's kind of part of the thing, and I've talked about this before. I've been talking about how storytellers are oracles, and it's not just storytellers. I think what I'm trying to say is that modern writers and creators of fiction are sort of the contemporary equivalent of oracles, right? We don't really have people in temples anymore, right, giving us information or really producing all that much interesting new spiritual knowledge, right? Oh, there's definitely some stuff out there, but the point is, I think you have to sort of sift through everything, right? You've got to sift through traditional spiritual and religious ideas. You have to sift through conventional knowledge and information and even scientific ideas. And then you have to also consider so many of our modern storyteller oracles and all this fiction and stuff we're watching. I continue to watch, you know, a lot of TV and read books, especially fantasy books and other things, and I think there's a reason for it. I think that God, the Great Father and the Great Mother truly are using that to speak to us. I think definitely God uses signs and symbols and synchronicities all throughout reality, right? Using the very fabric of reality to talk to us, right? Anything, you know, anything could be a sign or a symbol and synchronicity. And when you get in touch with your intuition and start to just look around and listen, right? You'll notice that reality is kind of speaking to you in this pretty wild way sometimes. Really also often perfectly synchronizing with your thoughts and all these things that you're trying to work through and figure out. And obviously, the mind is not loving that at first. Certainly my mind didn't, and my mind still is pretty grumbly about that, right? Although my mind has made a certain peace with it, my mind has kind of accepted it's true. You know, it just becomes, kind of overwhelming at a certain point. And yeah, it can be overwhelming in an unpleasant way. Not that God is trying to overwhelm us, but yeah, I mean, if you start to wake up and understand that the universe really is talking to you in this way, it's a lot, right? It's a lot to deal with, especially when obviously so many other people are not listening and not believing in that. And they're going to, you know, react often in a very unpleasant way towards you adopting that kind of mindset, and as it were. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that our grandparents talk to us, absolutely, you know, and are trying to help us out. And yeah, I'm just gonna let myself continue to flow all over the place. I don't know. I'm sometimes I try to be focused, but if you're wondering, you know, what is then sort of the universe made of, right? This is something I think about a lot, right? We talk about the primeval void, maybe the maelstrom, right? And then there's spirit, the stuff that God is kind of made of, and that our souls are definitely made of, right? And of course, you know, the Gnostics talk about this distinction a lot. They strongly feel that this realm is not really the true spiritual realm. Maybe that's the case, I'm not sure. I don't know if we would really spend a lot of time existing in a pure, perfectly ideal spiritual realm. Maybe we would. it sounds nice. Certainly, based on everything going on right now, it's very appealing, right? But the hard truth is that I think such a place would be rather boring. That's ultimately why I kind of reject the idea of nirvana or heaven, even. Because what would you do there? I mean, again, it sounds wonderful and it sounds like a beautiful relief to so much of the bad things that go on in reality, especially right now. But at the same time, we're just kind of actors living these lives, playing out these roles. We exist to exist. And it is kind of all about the drama, all about having a compelling story. Drama and conflict in the human heart is kind of the only thing that matters in the end of the day. And I think absolutely God wants us to be good and move towards goodness. And I think good and bad are real things, you know. I think we absolutely have preferences and likes and dislikes, and sometimes we use the word good to describe things that are things that we want. But I also think that good and bad are something else, something more. I think that we do have a sense of morality that is imbued in us from spirit. And it's kind of maybe at odds with this cosmic void stuff, right? I often talk about divine and cosmic and spirit and energy and matter. Energy and matter are kind of the same thing, right? And then spirit is something else. People talk about spirit as if it's energy, but it's not even really energy. Spirit is just truly something ineffable, I think. Really even beyond energy. Energy and matter, again, is really, again, what the cosmic stuff is, right? And I think that's kind of what we're made out of. I don't know. It's a little confusing, again. If scientists or astrophysicists are correct, right, they view us as being kind of a spiritual hologram. And I think that does make sense. That also jives with traditional ideas about all of this just being Maya, an illusion, right? The more they try to zoom in on atomic matter and structure, it seems that there's nothing really there. That it's mostly just whatever you want to call it, light or, I don't know, energy or information. There's a lot of different ways to think about it, right? And I think that ultimately whatever we're made out of seems to be a combination of spirit and of energy and matter. But also maybe at the same time, this cosmic energy and matter is still also an illusion. So it's a little bit confusing, right? There's got to be some differentiation for it to be meaningful. But maybe to a certain extent, it's all the same in the end. Maybe there is really ultimately just nothing but spirit. Or maybe there is kind of two things. Maybe there is spirit and there is this cosmic stuff, this energy and matter, right? And they're sort of dancing all the time. And if that's true, I still think that spirit is kind of more in charge. I think that spirit, again, is the ineffable stuff of God, ultimately. And I don't really think that we actually truly spend time sort of in that raw state. I think even though I'm talking about the idea of the primeval void, it's kind of almost theoretical or just something that only exists for a very short time, right? So a universe is created, okay, and then eventually comes to an end. And then I think when it ends, perhaps it sort of collapses back into that raw primeval void, that energy and matter. And maybe that has to do with black holes. Maybe that has to do with the universe eventually kind of consuming itself, right? And that cosmic energy and matter does represent those things, right? Consumption and destruction and hedonism, right? Always wanting to just consume and consume and consume. It is, sort of the stuff in you which pushes you towards pleasure, which really takes hold of your body at times, right? Oftentimes in unpleasant ways. leads us towards hedonism, leads us towards kind of being bad and not being moral. And if we truly lose ourselves and get completely corrupted, even towards becoming evil. And I don't think that people are truly evil in the sense of always being evil. But I think in a particular lifetime, you can become so corrupted that you do kind of become evil, right? And what do they say? Evil is the opposite of live, right? Evil, live, right? So when you're becoming evil, it's more than just being bad or doing some bad things here and there, right? If you're bad, you're not irretrievable. You might do a lot of bad stuff, but there's still some good in you, I think. And you're probably going to do some of both, right? Just as if you're good, you're probably going to do some bad things sometimes as well. But I think if you're evil, then you're really just giving yourself up to this raw cosmic energy and matter. And maybe that's why hedonistic people, and especially powerful elites and stuff, occult elites, who get very much in the mindset of do what thou wilt, as Aleister Crowley would say, don't like the idea of God and true spirit, and really just are very aligned with just the cosmic energy and matter because they've been so corrupted by that. And again, I don't think their souls are permanently corrupted, and I think they'll have an opportunity in the future to not be so villainous or so evil, potentially. But at the same time, I do think that people can fall so far in a lifetime that there might not be a road back for them in that particular lifetime. And I don't think they're going to be sent to hell or anything. I don't believe in hell. But I do believe in the idea of a life review, and I do believe that God will eventually hold people to account. I think after you die, you're going to experience and feel all of the things that you've done. And it might not be the same or as awful as being tortured for all eternity, but it's probably very unpleasant at the same time and very damaging almost to your soul. And you're going to accrue a lot of karma and have to work that out. Okay? And I still think you're going to be incarnated as a being, a sentient humanoid being, let's just say. All right? I don't think you're going to be downgraded to an animal or something, and I don't even want to look at it that way. I have nothing but love for all the animals, and I'm firmly vegan at this point and would advocate minimizing suffering and treating animals really just as well as we treat humans. I think that's important. Obviously, I think it's, again, when we're getting in those descension cycles and the demiurge is waking up and being full of fear, and then all sorts of other people are being infected by that and becoming more hedonistic and more corrupt, that we start to, of course, treat animals worse and worse, and then treat people worse and worse. In fact, I think if you look historically speaking, there's a interesting connection between the rise of animal pastoralism and husbandry and the rise of human behavior that is kind of similar. The rise of imperialism and sort of centralized states and slavery and class society and all these other things. I think there's absolutely a connection between dominating animals and controlling and using them, and also starting to dominate and control and use other people. I think the one sort of does lead into the other. And part of getting out of the situation that we're in right now really is about letting the animals go and no longer needing to dominate and control and eat them either. And that will, I believe, open up some positive metaphysical space so that human society can improve as well. And we won't dominate and control and use other people either, right? But yeah, so I also theorize that sort of there's kind of three things, right? There's energy and matter, okay, which I talk about being this void stuff in the primeval void, and then spirit, right? The stuff that God is made of, okay? The stuff that our souls are made of. And then I think there's an intermediary thing, right? And I think of energy and matter and void as the negative polarity, and God and spirit, right, and soul, and love is the positive polarity, right, love and fear as well. But I think that what ultimately happens is that God, the Great Father, and the Great Mother sort of take some of each of this stuff and make a third medium, and that is mind, that is intellect, that is consciousness and thought. And mind and consciousness is also quite a mysterious thing. Obviously, we understand it better than spirit, in that we certainly know, goes back to what Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. Yeah, that's very consistent and logical, and absolutely something that you can rely upon. You definitely do exist. You definitely do have a mind, for sure. Whereas it can be harder to truly know in the way that you want to know, in the way that the mind wants to know, right? That you have a soul or a spirit. You are taking that on faith to a certain extent, choosing to believe that, connecting with the divine. And like I said, God talks to us, and your mind can start to see different ways that there is this other stuff going on too, but there's still going to be some doubt and some uncertainty, and even some fear will creep in there, right? So it's not quite the same. But yeah, this mind consciousness is kind of like the neutral polarity, right? Positive, negative, and neutral, right? And that's the way in which the energy and the matter and the spirit can interact, right? Spirit is just completely positive, right? Just all wants to create and love, right? And then just pure raw energy and matter is kind of negative, just wants to consume and destroy, kind of. And then they can't really interact. It's just, I don't know. It's kind of like thinking about the yin yang symbol. Just, I don't know, if you think about spirit and cosmic energy, right, rotating around each other and just kind of trying to, they're just so polarized they can't even come together. And so mind and consciousness and the neutral polarity is what kind of brings them together. And I think this is actually symbolized in atomic structure, in fact, right? So you've got the nucleus, and then the proton is at the center, right? And then the neutrons sort of rotate around the proton within the nucleus, okay? And then the electrons, on the other hand, which are the negative polarity, they are outside the nucleus, right? And they're not allowed to enter inside the nucleus. Now, they still perform an important function, but they have to be a little bit separate, right? And ultimately, I think that mind and spirit are a little bit more naturally allied, right? And I don't want to hate on the body too much, or, this cosmic energy and matter. Again, we couldn't exist without it. We would just be in sort of a kind of a meaningless spiritual state of, and maybe you could sort of think about that as kind of nirvana, or a more basic idea of heaven, right? Where everything is just feels good and perfect and whatever. But again, there's no conflict, no drama, nothing compelling happening. There's no story that can go on there. Just as there's no story when it's just pure, raw, primeval void. Just too much chaos and destruction. So, right, that negative energy, those electrons, right, they have to be outside the nucleus. The nucleus being the universes that are created. And obviously, that's kind of, if that's true, that's a beautiful example of as above, so below, right? As they would say. At the smallest level, sort of being symbolic of the macrocosm as well, right? And yeah, maybe, again, the energy and the matter is quietly still spirit. I do kind of think that's true. I do think it's ultimately all spirit, but spirit changes itself and morphs itself so that these other things can exist, so that we can exist, so that we can have these stories, which is, again, all we really do. It's just story time down here all the time. And of course, the complexity of it is that there has to be these polarities and this conflict and this drama for there to be a story at all, and also for the story to have meaning, for goodness and love to have meaning. But then God Spirit is also trying to encourage us to be good, right? To not be too hedonistic, to not be too consumed by physical pleasure, by this sort of void energy that is also within us, this darkness that is within us as well. You know, I think that we're more than just light. I think that we are light and dark sort of mixed together. And that's okay. And I also think there's a difference between dark and darkness. And I would also say I think there's a difference between light and lightness. I think too much of one polarity is not good, because you can't see anything, right? in either case, right? If everything is just total darkness, well, you can't see anything. That's not good. But at the same time, if there was nothing but light, right, just pure spirit, you couldn't see anything either. And so that's kind of symbolic for the fact that there has to be a balance, right? And I think people know this, and that's why the yin-yang symbol in a lot of Taoist thought is still very popular, even among people who are not even really spiritual or don't believe in metaphysical things at all. They generally tend to like the idea of the yin-yang symbol and sort of that polarity and duality, which I think is fundamental to existence. It's not something that I think that you can transcend or escape. What would it mean to transcend those things? Again, it would just be getting back to some kind of state of being that is not really meaningful, not compelling, where we can't be actors. This is what we do. I'm pretty sure, right? As I'm talking more and more, I'm getting a little bit more confident, even though I started off being, unsure of myself. And I think that's fine. It can exist side by side. I'm trying to be as confident as I can be while also just remaining open-minded and sharing things with you, but not completely beating you over the head. Just being absolutely, completely convinced and certain that I know what's going on and that I perfectly understand all these things. I'm just very much trying to work through them, wade through all of this morass, but still share some insights, maybe even some wisdom, and be as confident as I can be about these things, right? So yeah, I think that these cycles of ascension and descension happen, and when the demiurge wakes up, when the demiurge is awoken or sort of released from his prison, right? Then things start to get worse. And I think we're sort of almost bottomed out at this point. I hope we've almost bottomed out, right? And then hopefully we'll be ascending then to something better, to more positive timelines, to more positive realities in the future. Okay? Where, things will still be complicated at times. Again, there still has to be some contrast, some good and bad for existence to continue, but hopefully significantly less bad than things have been. Certainly lately, but even in more recent times. I'm sorry, more ancient times. I mean, I've spent a lot of time reading about human history, and I know a lot about almost every human culture and civilization that's existed, from Sumeria and Egypt all the way up to the present, okay? And it's, not the best at times. I mean, if you were to try and sort of mathematically quantify this, the vast majority of civilizations and governments and cultures that have existed, as far as recorded history is concerned at least, right? I do believe there's some stuff before that as well, absolutely, but just talking about the past 6,000 to 7,000 years at least, okay? They've mostly been almost entirely run by elites who maybe are not quite as bad as the elites today, but were largely acting in their own interest and not really necessarily doing the best thing for the community, and not always really pursuing the good. Very rarely, in fact. So, again, this is why I understand if you want to take a very Gnostic view of things. Think about the powers and the archons, maybe, and all this stuff influencing people. And Yeah, it seems like the more power you get, the worse things get. But I do have some sense that it's not always like this. I think that all of recorded history has basically happened during this dissension period, and so it leads us to believe, as Thomas Hobbes would say, that life is just nasty and brutish and short, right? Or it leads us to adopt certain ideas about, I don't know, maybe the darkest side of natural selection, right? Just, I don't know, reality just being nothing but survival of the fittest. And there is a lot of that in nature, I think. Again, even if things were better, there would still have to be some of that in nature. And that bothers me too, just the fact that we sort of have to constantly eat and consume other life forces, basically to exist. And I don't know, maybe we can get to a point where we don't even need that. Could be. I'm just mostly trying to be, well, definitely vegan. I'm working really on being raw vegan and honestly moving towards being fruitarian. And I think that ultimately is probably the best diet, which does kind of annoy me at times. Not because I don't care so much about the animals. I do care about the animals, but like I'm saying, I think it's even more than the animals. I think it's also kind of trying to take care of the plants as much as possible, okay? And the most minimal impact you can have is really just kind of eating fruit, being a frugivore. And it's very challenging, especially when you're going from really eating everything and lots of everything to just potentially going to that. And there's a lot of people transitioning that way, and more people, especially those who are spiritual, are starting to move beyond just veganism and back to this other way of being. And obviously that's very captured in the traditions regarding the Garden of Eden, right? Being in a primordial Edenic state where we're just going around eating fruit and stuff. And I have a lot of questions about that. I want to know more about why meat tastes good. And I don't know. There are things that concern me. I've talked about that in some other videos. So, you know, I don't know. I think I've expressed that. I'll just sort of express it again. Yeah, it bothers me a lot. And I think it sort of makes sense in terms of there are times when perhaps we do need to eat anything to survive, but there are also times when we don't have to do that. And I think now we're living in such a time. And, you know, even if we do become vegan or fruitarian, right, I do think there will be times in the future, other lifetimes, and certainly other universes where we will eat meat again. So, in a certain sense, even if you're going to give certain things up, give certain pleasures up, it probably will come back round, right? These cycles of descension and ascension. And I think that is what's happening right now, is that we're in this ascension cycle, and that's why we're being called to do this. And things have gotten so bad that perhaps we're being pushed sometimes a little bit faster than we're always ready to go. I certainly feel that way. I feel like God is putting a lot of pressure on me, to be honest, to move as quickly as I can. And I think that God is sympathetic and understanding and does want us to ultimately still go at the right pace and ultimately kind of be the tortoise and not the hare. But, you know, sometimes it is important to not slack and to make sure that you're still challenging yourself and not moving too slowly just because it's a little bit easier, you know. And I don't know. It's okay. We're just doing the best we can. I'm doing the best we can. I'm also trying to go easy on myself because it can be really difficult, right? And it really does take away from the enjoyment of existence. Ultimately, like I said, we just exist to exist. This is just a story. We're just actors playing out these roles in this drama. And if you're just spending all of your time obsessing about figuring out what's happening or trying to do the right thing and always be just good and as perfect as you can be, it's really going to reduce the quality of your existence. But at the same time, sometimes that's because we're afraid and it's difficult to change and we're just so used to what we know, right? And yeah, it's not unreasonable or unfair to be asked to give certain things up, to sacrifice certain things, to change things about yourself in order to get other things that you want. So if you want a better reality, a better timeline, where there's much more loving and good stuff happening and much less dominion of humans over other humans, maybe that does really inherently involve giving up dominating and eating animals as well. And maybe that is a fair trade, something worthwhile, especially considering the trajectory of dominion and, I don't know, the potential dystopian realities and timelines that we can clearly all see unfolding more and more. So, I'm not trying to scare people. I'm not trying to scare myself, but I have a pretty intuitive sense that these things are strongly linked. And that the metaphysics of, at the very least, being vegan means that you are going to greatly enhance the chance of getting to a better timeline, of bringing heaven to earth, of making everything better within the human community as well. Right? All very linked together. Again, it's that powerful, raw, demiurgic void, negative energy, antimatter, whatever you want to call it, right? That's where all the desire to consume and just let yourself run wild, just chasing after food and chasing after other physical pleasure, right? Just tons of casual sex and all this stuff, which is also probably something that we kind of need to give up, right? If we want to get to a better reality. And I think it's okay to make love, absolutely, and to have loving relationships with partners that you truly, deeply care about and are connected to, right? But I think it's important to have that deep connection. And if you're just trying to have sex with people purely because you're physically attracted to them, or you have this strong desire to procreate, and Lord knows it is incredibly strong, that's not necessarily the best, and it might lead towards things that are less what you want in terms of everything else around you. Everything is really connected in that way, right? You can't just totally separate it as much as you want to sort of segment it. You might think to yourself, well, it's okay. I have a right to pursue pleasure and have casual sex and eat meat, but then I'm still going to be, a good person in other ways and be very liberal and progressive and treating people well and advocating for justice and all this other stuff. And yeah, that makes sense if you view things separately, but I think it probably is the case that everything is connected, energetically connected, so it really does probably go hand in hand. And unfortunately, if you really want all that other good human stuff and positive human social relations, you have to probably adjust the way you behave in these other ways. And I absolutely believe that God wants us to enjoy life and wants us to have pleasure, right? Wants us to make love. I'm not, again, adopting or advocating a Gnostic view or any kind of other strict spiritual aesthetic view that we should deny the body and deny ourselves pleasure entirely. I just think we need to be more balanced, and it needs to be pursued in a healthy way, and that we need to be disciplined, mentally disciplined, and then truly making sure that the soul, the spirit, is in charge, right? Not just letting the body run wild, but at the same time taking care of the body and acknowledging that we are spiritual beings having a physical experience via the medium of the mind, sort of connecting those two things, right? And it's important to do both. It's important to honor your spirit and your soul, but it's also okay and important to be a body and to enjoy physical pleasure, enjoy the things that you eat, and get pleasure from other things too. Really, as long as you're following the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Don't create unnecessary suffering or harm. Don't do things to other people or other beings that you wouldn't want done to you. Don't do things that you know are bad. Certainly that are evil. And you do really know this in your heart, okay? Even though the mind is constantly just spinning around and trying to figure it out, entertaining all sorts of possibilities, right? Currently, I'm reading Anna Karenina. I really love Tolstoy. I've been enjoying him a lot lately. I read War and Peace just recently as well. And there's this great part where Levin is talking to, I think it's Platov, right? And he's asking, how do we know? How do we know what's good? How do we know what's right, right? And Platov basically says to him, by knowing it. Because you do just know it. You know it in your heart. You know what is right and what is wrong. These things are not relative, okay? What you want and don't want, what you like and what you don't like, that's more subjective. But goodness and love and pursuing those things are objectively real and exist, whether or not you acknowledge them, right? And the people that advocate moral relativism are mostly just people that are trying to sort of clear their conscience because they're doing bad things and often quite evil things, right? And so they want people to think that, oh, there's no difference between good and bad. Sometimes they'll try to tell you that just because, there is good and bad, just because they both exist, just because they have to exist for reality to exist, for the universe to exist, and for goodness to have meaning, that somehow, they're kind of the same, or that it doesn't really matter. But I don't think that's true. I think it does matter. I think that God is always watching over us and encouraging us to be good, even though God knows that at times we won't be. And even though God knows that at times certain souls and specific incarnations are going to be very evil, right? And that at times the demiurge is going to be active and awake and doing very evil things and encouraging all sorts of... Well, if you're still watching this video, I think you probably know about a lot of the things going on right now and stuff that the elites of this world are up to and trying to promote and whatnot. So, yeah, definitely right here down in the, hopefully the end of the Kali Yuga and the Iron Age, right? And hopefully soon, if not already, ascending back up towards something better, something a lot more. And yeah, again, absolutely, on a certain level, it doesn't technically matter. I can't completely deny that. We do just exist to exist. Okay? And there are going to be some people doing bad and evil things, but I don't think that that's an excuse to not try and be good at the very least. And I think that's also the reason that most people are generally trying to be good. Might be, a little bit too selfish from time to times and let anger and fear and other emotions carry them away, but ultimately they're trying to be good. I think this is one of the reasons why, bad and truly evil people have to work so hard to do bad and evil things. Either they've got to acquire a lot of physical, material force, what we would call sort of military power, right? And just force their will on people. Or, as so many modern elites and as the modern powers that be, well, not just modern, even going back earlier in history, right? But whatever, right? Do is they try to deceive people, right? Sauron the deceiver, the devil, the demiurge, his greatest weapon is deception and lies, right? Tricking people into doing what he wants, tricking people into thinking there's no difference between good and bad, tricking people into thinking that bad things are maybe good, even though you just know in your heart, and you don't even need to worry about it. You don't need to think about it. The more you're thinking about it, that's where you're getting led astray. Not to entirely hate on thinking, but yeah, the demiurge really does attack your mind more than anything else. I don't think the demiurge can access your soul or your spirit or your heart. So the demiurge is going to try and get you in this really mental state and get you to sort of go along. That's why people do. They justify things, they rationalize things, try to explain it away all the time. Really, they're just trying to excuse bad and evil behavior, which they know is not good and not what we're looking for, right? So they use deception. So yeah, that's kind of an encouraging thing, even though people do a lot of bad stuff sometimes and can get carried away with physical pleasure and all that. I think really it is mostly because there are these truly evil people, and maybe also the devil as well, right? Operating against us at times and trying to get people to go along with these things. It's an interesting thing. I've studied a lot of military history. I actually know almost more about military history probably than any other conventional subject, at least, okay? And one thing that you hear a lot of people say is that the vast majority of soldiers just don't want to kill people. They don't really want to hurt other human beings. And really, it's just that there's this small percentage, maybe 1 out of every 20 warriors or soldiers, who are truly, I guess in psychological terms, we might say sociopathic or psychopathic. And they are the ones who sort of pressure the other soldiers to go along, right? To do what people don't really want to do. People don't really want to kill other humans. People don't really want to kill animals either, okay? Don't want to create harm because we've got these souls imbued by spirit. And we know what's good. We know that even though there's going to be these cycles of life and death, and even though bad things are going to happen, it would be better to do good things and to minimize suffering. That's really what we're trying to do here, right? All right. I think that's pretty good. I think it's about all I have to say for right now. I'm sure I'll have more things to say soon. Yeah, it's great. I love this. It's really just kind of a therapy session for me. Who knew? Just making videos and putting them out there. Doesn't even really matter to me anymore how many people ever see these videos, or I don't know. If you're watching and this is helping you in some way, that's wonderful. That's great. Just keep doing the best you can, and it's okay to keep trying to figure things out. It's okay, and indeed probably very important, to keep improving yourselves. But also go easy on yourself. It is all just a dream in the end. We're just actors dancing across the stars to infinity and beyond. And it will always be this way. It always has been. What more else could there be? What else really makes sense? It's the only thing that really makes sense to me. So I want you to know that you're wonderful and you're beautiful. And you are perfect the way you are, even if you can maybe be better. I know, it's kind of a paradox, but sometimes things are just paradoxical, and I guess we just have to live with that and accept that. I love you very, very much, and God loves you very much, the Great Father and the Great Mother, and the Divine Father and the Divine Mother. Don't worry about the demiurge. I think we're in the process of actually putting him back to sleep and maybe getting back to more of that ascended, better kind of reality that we're all very much wanting to see. Certainly in the spiritual community, right? Certainly, probably, if you're still watching this video. Thank you for watching again. If you like, love, subscribe, share, or just enjoy it yourself. I don't know. Many blessings. I love you very much. We'll see you again soon for another Midnight Riff on whatever. Take care.